Feeding protocols provide a way to define how animals progress through a series of rations, optimizing their growth along the way. Pens are assigned a feeding protocol with a bunk call, and Fusion subsequently suggests bunk calls and ration changes on subsequent days based on the feeding protocol. While the use of feeding protocols is optional, we highly recommend them because they are a powerful feeding tool suitable for both inexperienced and experienced feed staff. To set up a feeding protocol, select the Feeding Protocols section in the Fusion Setup Assistant, and then click Open Feeding Protocols List window to access the list of protocols. You can also access it from the Setup menu if the Fusion admin menu bar is active. To create a new protocol, click the New button. It's likely you'll want your nutritionist to assist in configuring your feeding protocols. Start by giving the protocol a name. If you stop using the protocol in the future, you can mark it as inactive so it no longer appears as an option when making bunk calls. If the feeding protocol is specific to a particular yard, you can specify the location using the location field. For now, we'll leave the protocol as available for any location. Feeding protocols typically consist of multiple steps, and you can add, remove, and rearrange the steps in this list. Then, use the fields on the right to adjust the properties of the selected step. These properties include which ration should be fed during the step, how bunk call increases are suggested during the step, and when Fusion should recommend transitioning to the next step. Let's begin with the rations. For this step, we want the cattle to be on ration starter 1, so we'll add it using the plus button. Normally, cattle remain on a single ration for the duration of a step, but you can also rotate through multiple rations if desired. If we wanted the cattle to be on starter 1 for 2 days, and then switch to starter 2 for 2 days, and then back to starter 1 in a repeating cycle until the next step, here's how we'd set it up. However, that's not our intention in this case, so we'll stick to just one ration for this step. Now, let's explore the next section where you configure how Fusion suggests bunk call increases to the feed crew. There are 2 options, one based on a bunk scoring system and the other designed to achieve a daily gain target. If you opt for the first option based on a bunk scoring system, the person making the bunk call will enter a bunk score. Fusion will then suggest a new bunk call value based on the score and the logic you set up here. The scores range from 1 to 5, with each score representing a different scenario. 1 indicates that the bunks are slick and the cattle are showing a high level of interest. 2 suggests that the bunks are slick, but the cattle are not particularly interested. 3 represents the ideal scenario. 4 implies that there are 5 to 10% of feed remaining in the bunk. 5 means there is more than 10% feed left over. If you forget these, just click the Help button. The documentation lists them. Let's walk through an example. You can double-click in the one row and change the percentage to 5%. With this setup, if the person making bunk calls scores the pen as a 1, Fusion will recommend increasing the bunk call by 5%, but only if it meets the rest of the criteria in this row. They've scored the bunk as a 1 for 1 consecutive day, today, and it has been at least 0 days since the last bunk call change. Suppose you want to increase the target by 2.5% if they score a 2, but only if they score 2 days in a row, and it's been 3 days since the last bunk call change. You can configure it like this. By the way, the percentage can be negative, which is often the case for scores 4 and 5. This results in a reduction of the target by the specified percentage. If you choose the second option, you only need to enter the desired gain per day. Fusion will use its knowledge of the cattle in the pen, including cattle type, ration, and weight, to calculate a bunk call value using NRC equations that should achieve the desired daily gain. Now, let's focus on determining when Fusion should suggest moving to the next step in your feeding protocol. There are 6 possible criteria you can have Fusion monitor. For our example, Let's configure it so that Fusion recommends moving to step 2 when the cattle have been on this step for at least 7 days and their dry matter intake as a percentage of body weight is at least 1.5%. With all selected here, it means that both of these conditions must be true for Fusion to suggest moving to step 2. If we were to change it to any, Fusion would recommend moving to step 2 when either one of the selected criteria becomes true. If you feed with multiple passes and want the transition to the next step to happen later in the day, you can use this field to specify when. These are the fundamentals of creating a feeding protocol. You can use the plus button to add additional steps and configure them as needed, repeating the process for as many steps as you require in this protocol. Don't forget to save the protocol. Then create any other protocols you need in the same manner. Perfecting your protocols may take a few iterations, but the effort will be worthwhile. If you need a refresher on how bunk calls are made, please watch the Guide to Making Bunk Calls video. And if you require assistance, consult the documentation or reach out to our support team.